welcome to the What's Your Story podcast edition. I'm your host, Darren Barron Jr.
And I'm your co-host, Becca Dennis.
And so, Becca, what are we talking about this evening?
Today we're going to be talking with Sarah Dinan, who is a licensed clinician, and we're going to be talking about mental health and how it helps your wellness.
Absolutely, and this is going to be a really, really good podcast show because it's really going to help us to really see the importance of mental health and how we can continue to maintain it. And so, Sarah Dinan, we are so happy to have you on our show, so thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and especially after the pandemic, there's so many people struggling with mental health concerns. I think this is a very important topic to cover.
Absolutely.
More
Very
people
much so.
than ever are in need of mental health support.
Exactly. And, especially, and that's a good point with the pandemic, everyone has been in shelter, and it's just people have been isolated.
Yep.
And that isolation can cause a lot of depression and anxiety. But before we go diving deep into mental health, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am a licensed professional counselor. I've been in the field since 2007, and I started off, as many therapists do, doing agency work. And from there, I decided that I wanted to go into private practice, and after some guidance from more seasoned professionals in the field who helped me along the way, I established my own practice, and I've been there. I opened up the practice in 2012, and I've been growing ever since. I focus in on anxiety disorders, major depressive disorder, parenting issues, especially when it comes to teenagers. I like to work with that family dynamic in navigating those difficult years for teenagers. I actually run an after-school group on Tuesdays. So it's one of the highlights of my week because a lot of these kids, and I actually run it over the summer too, but they come together in the afternoon, and it's a place where they don't feel alone and they feel like they can express themselves without being judged. And also I actually have my own podcast where I help educate professionals on topics going on in the world and trends and educate them on the best therapeutic approaches that they can use in session.
Yes.
How about that?
Yeah,
Wow.
you do. And I just want to say that I've listened to your podcast all day today. And your podcast is one of the first ones that I've ever listened to because I've never really listened to podcasts before.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to me.
Yeah,
It's so interesting.
we try to take current things going on and then apply it to how this looks in the therapeutic setting and ways that therapists can navigate it. So I feel like it's interesting because it's things that everybody can relate to, things that are going on right now. So.
It is,
Absolutely,
for sure.
absolutely. So what inspired you, or what got you into becoming a professional therapist that you are today?
I think a lot of it had to do with, my own teenage years and struggling, and there was a lot of people and professionals there to kind of help me talk through some of those issues. And my mom was a really good talker, and she was not a licensed professional counselor, but she was actually a hairdresser. And when you
Oh, those are the best ones.
I know.
Yeah.
So I
That is a license.
think it is. They do
Right,
become licensed therapists.
Totally.
And I saw my mom essentially, for some people, she saw them weekly for their comb outs. And it was those are weekly therapeutic
That's
sessions.
incredible.
So it was inspiring
Apple
and
far from tree.
Uh-huh.
Not too far.
and seeing my mom
Wow.
be that person for others.
That
and
ear to listen.
I was inspired to kind of go in that route
Oh, that's
myself. And then also friends would be encouraging. They're like, wow, you're really easy to talk to. So I got a lot of positive feedback from my peers as well.
yeah.
Wow, and I think that goes a long way, especially when someone, a person needs to talk to someone, right? And especially when you have that listening ear, you can listen to what they have to say, but you're listening with a genuine mindset of wanting to support them. And so how important is that to have those qualities or those attributes when it comes to assisting people in that field?
I think that's most important, right? Because a lot of therapists, we sometimes feel this pressure to advise, and we're like, oh my gosh, what do I say to this person who's struggling with these issues that I can't relate to? But really, that's I try to encourage therapists, like, we got to take that pressure off of ourselves, because first we're listeners, and having a good listening ear and being in tune, and a phrase that I like to use is holding that space for that person is first and foremost. The words and everything else will come naturally, but you have to kind of be in tune.
What they need.
And like dial down the things that you have going on in your mind and turn up and really hear what your clients are saying. And a lot of times through that listening ear, you draw connections that they don't even pick up on, and draw on themes and strengths that they're not even seeing themselves.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting. So it's interesting because it makes a big difference when you're able to listen, right? And just listening in itself is like showing love and kindness to them, right? And so I've always, especially when talking to people, and I just always appreciated when they listen,
Right.
and because
And it's not just like, yeah, okay, awesome. Like, just those.
And then they
Yeah,
bring
yeah,
it
yeah.
back to themselves,
Right.
right? So
Right,
there's,
Exactly.
I disclose.
There's no like help.
Nothing
There's
about
no
me,
like,
yeah.
all right, let's like talk about a plan here. Nothing. And it's just kind of like where you stand with them. But that's the thing that's just so important just about therapy overall. That is that you have somebody who is your safe haven.
Yeah.
yeah.
And who you can come to and you can talk to and you can work things out. And I think that's just so important for everybody to know that, first of all, therapists, like, they save lives.
Yes.
That's especially in the pandemic. I'm sure that was like an extremely hard time, like, as a therapist.
Yes.
Good
Like,
point. Yeah. So would you be able to relate some of that, what that experience was like for you as like during that time?
Yes. I mean, I think it's safe to say most therapists have their own therapist. And I think that sometimes that comes as a surprise to people, but we see the value and importance and the growth within our patients and how they benefit from it, that we also get the benefit as well. And many of us were even in therapy before we became therapists ourselves. And I think it was a lot. We had a lot of calls. We were also navigating this transition from in-person counseling sessions to virtual sessions, and we had to really completely revamp our structure of our practices and like the not so fun stuff, the insurance billing, and then taking on in trying to navigate some of these issues that were presented. There was no class in our master's program that talked about how to help others in a pandemic.
how
So
does anybody,
Exactly.
like, there's no class that could have prepared any of us for last year and, the ongoing troubles.
yeah, and I think the beautiful thing about the mental health community is that we're all helpers, and so everybody kind of turned to each other to like help and say, okay, I'm using this program. What program are you using? It's a really good network of people that are genuinely there to help other clinicians like navigate some of those uncharted waters. And it was really great to see different trainings pop up and different things pop up to like give support to us. And then I also helped then take that information, and I did some trainings for other organizations in the area to help their therapists get trained to do virtual therapy sessions.
Yeah, and I think that's important that you bring up, that it's so important to remember that your therapist. So I've seen a therapist since I was in 7th grade, and the way I grew up was like, you saw a teacher and that was a teacher. That's what they did. And you forget that that person has a life. They go home. They have their own lives. They're not just a teacher just staying there. And the same thing with a therapist. It's like, this is a real person. So like, this is not just a therapist. This is somebody that actually has their own life.
Yeah.
So it's important to remember that, and to remember that you need your care too.
Yes.
And I'm like curious, what do you do for your own self-care to deflect or whatever from?
Yeah, I mean,
everything?
outside of, having my own help, and then also my friends are like a great network of support to kind of help me decompress, like getting together socially. And over the pandemic, it was like everybody kind of did over Zoom and having those Zoom meetings.
Zoom and wine.
Zoom and wine with their friends.
Yeah.
And I think Physical activity is so important. There's so much research and science that goes behind the mental health benefits of physical activity and a healthy diet, which was a very slippery slope when you're home in the pandemic and you are inside, all access to the pantry. But it's important that, like, for my own self-care, that I'm mindful of what I put in my body, because it definitely has a direct link to how I feel mentally, and giving myself a break when I need a break.
Yeah.
And knowing that in order for me to do the best at my job and to do the best for my family, I also have to take care of me first.
Yeah.
Of course.
That's a
Of
good
course.
point. It's taking care of yourself first before you can take care of others. I think that's a really good point. When you, during the pandemic, when, as you have, your clients and things like that, during the pandemic, what was it challenging for you to pivot during that time? Because I know a lot of times, like Becca had mentioned, it caught everyone off
I
guard.
did.
Yeah.
But pivoting for you how was that transition?
I distinctly remember the 1 week, and I see how many clients I have, and I would be coming home way earlier than I ever did, and my husband would be like, "What's going on? What's going on?" I'm like, people are nervous about seeing me in person, with the coronavirus spreading. And I remember it, like, got me worried, concerned. This is my job, and are my clients okay? Like, what's going on here? And actually, remember, like, Tiger King, like, first came out on Netflix. I remember that night. I totally
Saved us all.
I know, but that's what it was like. I totally, I needed that moment to kind of, like, decompress. I remember I never, like, really sit down and, like, watch a show when my kids are awake. I usually save that till after, but that day I was just really confused and sad and uncertain, and I, like, laid on the couch for the first time, and sure, I binged watched it, but the next morning I woke up and I'm like, I gotta do something here. It just, because I knew I wasn't feeling good about where my practice was at, and I had concerns for my clients of what they were going through. And so that was the moment I, like, reached out to my colleagues to, like, help me pivot. Like, what are we gonna do here? Because we know people are gonna need help, and we don't want our businesses to struggle. And so it was that moment when I really felt myself be uncharacteristic. Like, I was totally disengaged, and just when I woke up the next morning, I was like, we got to do something here. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I know because especially you having that mentality, because you were so used to having a routine.
Mm-hmm.
Right, you
Yeah.
had a routine, and then all
And your patients were too.
Yeah.
Like, coming from a patient perspective,
Yeah.
it throws them off, and then it could throw them into a pit of darkness as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that maybe that one time a week that they get dressed to go out is that's the one
That's
time.
it.
That's
it.
it.
They're getting out.
You know?
Yeah.
And I know, like, for me, that was the hardest struggle. But then you get into your new routine, and it's like, oh, wow, this is weird. I'm talking to my therapist.
Yeah.
But
But that's what it was.
Yeah.
And you hit the nail on the head with the word routine. I was like, this is not my routine. I should not be home this time of day. And it didn't feel right.
Right.
And it felt sad, and it felt confused, and it felt lost. And then I watched Tiger King.
Jokes and my friends and I, like,
Yeah.
joked about that was what, like, saved us from
Netflix made a lot of money.
I know. And then it was like, this isn't me.
Yeah.
And I-
like all the quotes from that show.
I know, and all the memes that were going on.
Like, literally saved everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you had TikTok.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Uh-huh.
It was
Just
crazy.
Like, this is how we survive.
Yes.
So I was thinking about too, because how, even though the pandemic, when you think about that, it's negative, right? People died, people get sick.
Yeah.
That's all negative. But how were as a therapist and your colleagues, how were you able to turn that around and to think of it from a different perspective, and how did that motivate you to keep going?
I think a lot of times I try to put myself in the position of, like, what would I say to a client, right? So we use this concept of, like, our automatic thought patterns. I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist, and so I focus a lot on our cognitions. And so your first thought, your automatic thought might be, well, this is really terrible. My kids aren't going to school. I'm homeschooling them. They're not learning as successfully as they would be in the in-classroom environment. I haven't seen my family because I'm afraid of getting sick. You know, my loved ones are in the hospital. That could be my automatic thought. The second thought is the one that we have more control over, and that's often what I talk to my patients about, and then I'm reflective on that myself. You know, the reality is the second thought, yes, there's a lot of things going on that I don't have control over
Right.
and that are really hard and distressing, but there's also some really beautiful things going on here. And it's that second thought that we have more control over to decide to look at what we have around us and to fill it with gratitude.
Of course.
My husband's a pilot, so I was grateful that his plane was grounded
Right.
and we could spend more
Right.
time together as a family. And I could actually see what it was like for my kids to learn and to really appreciate teachers because they're not always great listeners, you know, so I
Right,
established
exactly.
more gratitude, you know.
A different perception.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was kind of focusing in on the beautiful things that were going on, the creativity. I loved the car parades and the appreciative for communities coming together and being creative in unique ways to celebrate, like looking at those things instead of focusing in on
Inspired.
the negative.
Inspired a lot of people.
Yeah,
You know?
it sure did. It sure did. So as a therapist, what's one of your favorite things about what you do? What if you could name a couple or a few? What are some of the favorite things that you like?
That I like to do in the therapy role?
Mhm.
Yeah. Oftentimes I don't say it to my clients, but when I say statements of, like when I reiterate statements back to them of saying, you know what, you're growing, you know, you have a lot of strength behind you. And I point out their strengths, or I say something of people aren't judging you as harshly as you think that they are. And just certain taglines that sometimes my clients, I give them a lot, and then to hear them say it in their conversation and when they're retelling a story, when they start telling a story of like, you know, I was sitting getting ready for work and my automatic thought was, I don't want to get up today, I don't want to go and face my coworkers because they're really annoying me, but you know what, my second thought was like, I am grateful I have a job. So hearing my clients like use the tools that we talk about in session, like that is like one of my favorite like moments in counseling. And for clients to come back and say like, I have one client who struggles to advocate for herself, and when she comes in on those weeks and she's like, I used my strong voice, we call it her strong voice, you know, those types of things like make me feel like, okay, I'm making a difference.
Seeing your hard work
Yeah.
come to life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And being practiced every day.
Yes, and celebrating that for them, because
Of course.
ultimately I could talk their ear off and I can give them all the tools, but ultimately they're the ones putting into practice. So actually like celebrating that with my client, that they're putting the work in and making these improvements and changes, is a beautiful moment.
And that's so
It is.
important too, because as you know, a therapist could talk to a patient until they're blue in the face, and the patient's only going to get better, only going to move on with whatever is ailing them if they choose to, and
Yes.
if they use those tools that you're giving to them.
Yes.
And it's probably so rewarding, I'm sure, like just seeing that in front of your,
In front of you.
like how inspiring.
Yeah, and that's one of the other things I do is I run a supervision group. So for pre-licensed professionals, and we call those golden nugget moments, because you can get really burned out in this field, especially like early on. You tend to have like lower pay and higher caseloads, and so they're kind of in that grind. You know, they're pre-licensed, and you know, that's one of the things we make sure we talk about in supervision, like golden nuggets. And, you know, so it's important for therapists to always remember like those moments like
Those
that and
moments
hold on
that
to
keeps
that.
you going.
Yes,
Keeps
that's-
you going.
And that's a good point, because I think so, like a lot of times, you know, we can have days when they're not so good, right? Or just moments in life where sometimes we just feel like we just can't go on, but we have to reflect back on the
Yeah.
positive things
Yeah,
that we've
and
done
those
and that
little
we've
sparks.
accomplished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. That's a really
Yeah.
good point.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, you know, of your podcast.
Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about that. So how did that all start? And and what are some of the positive experiences that you've had in conducting your podcast?
So the podcast is called Therapeutic Perspective, and it was around the time of pandemic because my workload was pretty slow, and I have a background in broadcasting. So before I started working in the mental health field, I did some work on my college campus in broadcasting, and I changed direction, but I still had this passion for journalism. I love talking to people and getting to know their story, kind of like how you guys are doing, and just interviewing people. And I also have this passion for education, especially during the pandemic when I'm Googling how to counsel during a pandemic. I felt tapped out of resources. And I thought we really need to provide therapists with real-time information and treatment modalities to help with real-time issues. So that's where the idea kind of started, and I got a lot of positive feedback from my colleagues.
It's amazing.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Nice.
And I can't wait to tell my therapist to listen to
Yes.
Therapeutic Perspective. It's incredible also as a patient listening to it.
Yeah.
And listening to a different version of therapy. You know?
Yeah, and I think it's helpful for patients because you can kind of see what the intention for the therapist
Exactly.
is.
Right.
And you
the whole view.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what the goals for, you'll talk about goals in session, but often you'll get to understand where your therapist is coming from in directing. Sometimes it's like directing traffic, being that tour guide in those therapy sessions. Yeah, so it really just came out of, hey, I want to do something different. I have this passion in helping therapists in real time, my background in journalism, and it just all came to be. And I had a lot of colleagues who were like, yes, let's do a show on this. And so then I'd have them on there, and it's just been growing ever since.
That is awesome.
So
That is
cool.
so awesome. And so have you gotten any positive feedback from the podcast?
Yeah, I've had so many therapists who will listen in between appointments or after work on their drive home, who, take away something from it that they can apply to their sessions the next day or the next hour. They take something away from it. And the really cool part is all of our podcasts, therapists can obtain continuing education credits, which
Yes,
is
yeah.
really cool.
I've heard that 10
Interesting.
times today.
Continuing education credits. So all therapists in the state of Pennsylvania are required to get 30 continuing education credits every 2 years. So it's, 1 hour you can use that for your benefit to take to your next session that you hold, and also it can go towards that 30 continuing education requirements. So
Yeah.
That is so
That's
awesome.
It is.
That is
Yeah,
so
sure.
cool. I just love seeing. I love the part where you were in broadcasting in school, and then taking that experience with the passion for education.
Yeah, and just making this
And-
big melting pot.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And
Yeah.
I think that is just so cool because it really just comes full circle.
yes.
Right.
And,
Exactly.
and now you've created this podcast,
Yeah.
which is now helping those like Becca and myself and so many others that listen in. So I think that's just beautiful work that you do.
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of my background that, because I was an intern for MTV. I used to work for Rachel Ray.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, so
so cool.
sometimes I forget that, I had those experiences
Yeah.
and they all
Yeah.
kind of drove me to try to get back into that field. And
But you have a sprinkling of everything, which I
Small
think
touch.
I
Yeah.
love that. I think that's really great and just uses everything that you're good at and
enjoy.
yeah,
Yeah.
enjoy it. Yeah.
Exactly. So how can people tune into Therapeutic Perspective so we can tell our audience, let the audience know?
Yes. So right now we are on our website, therapeuticperspective.com. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, Podbean, and hopefully soon we'll be on some other podcast platforms. But for now, that's what we got.
Very nice.
Awesome.
Very
and I
nice.
have to ask,
Yes.
what are some book recommendations that you give either to your patients or to other counselors or to us?
Yeah.
Because you ask every single episode.
I do.
So
What
I
book-
wanna pin it back to you and see what you have. on
Yeah. So my other co-host. Like another person that hosts the podcast is Shonda Morales, and she has a book called Breathe Mama Breathe. She's a mindfulness therapist, so her book is a great read, and for individuals who are wanting to kind of tap into more mindfulness practices, like that's a great one. I really like, me personally, sometimes I need a break from therapy. So I like to read for fun, things that are totally not therapy related. So I think like for therapists, sometimes it's nice to kind of step out and get a break. And I think there's a lot of, sometimes as therapists, we tend to psychoanalyze everything. So even if I'm reading a book, I'm like still psychoanalyzing it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
they're doing this behavior because of, this triggered them. But yeah, so off the top of my head, I would definitely check out Shonda Morales, Breathe Mama Breathe. And yeah, that's all the ones I can think of at the top of my head. But also, like, for anybody that treats adolescent clients, like the staples, Queen Bees and Wannabes, I always reference that one a lot in sessions, especially when parents are really struggling with their teenagers and some of those social dynamics that can kind of take place. Like, it kind of, Queen Bees and Wannabes kind of give you some insight into that. So, yeah.
Of course. Well, thank you.
Very
Yeah,
nice,
yeah.
very nice. Well, Sarah, we thank you so much for coming on to our first episode podcast here for What's Your Story.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And if everyone didn't know, we actually featured Sarah on What's Your Story. We actually did a little film for her, and we also have her story on our site. So definitely feel free to check that out. And thank you so much for joining us. And we are here live from the Hayden Films Institute, a nonprofit organization designed to empower and educate and fund global independent and student filmmakers. And we greatly appreciate this opportunity to be in this space. Again, to close, I am your host, Darren Barron Jr.
And I'm Becca Dennis, Team D&D.
And this is What's Your Story Podcast Edition.